"We can't afford to feed you," my dad said, kicking me out at 18. 10 years later, I'm a chef, a Michelin star. They showed up asking for a free table. I sent the server over, the bill and a note. "We reserve the right to refuse service." My father didn't even lower his voice when he said it. "We can't afford to feed you," he muttered, shoving my backpack toward the door like it was trash. "You're 18 now. Figure it out." The screen door slammed behind me before I could say a word. I remember the smell of dinner drifting through the cracked window, roasted chicken, garlic, something warm and familiar. My stomach twisted as I stood on the porch with everything I owned stuffed into a bag. Inside, my parents and my younger brother sat down at the table like nothing had happened. No one followed me outside. No one asked if I had somewhere to go. That night I slept behind a diner, curled beside a dumpster that hummed with flies and old grease. The cook came out around midnight and tossed a bag of stale bread toward me, without asking questions. 10 years later, the dining room of my restaurant fell silent when the host whispered, "Chef, your parents are here," and they were asking for a free table. I was the quiet kid in our house, the one who stayed out of the way. My father believed in two kinds of people, those who earned their place and those who were a burden. In his eyes, I'd always been the second kind. I wasn't strong like my brother, who helped him with construction jobs. I wasn't loud, confident, or useful in the ways he understood. I just cooked. When I was 14, I started making dinner most nights because my mom worked late and my dad didn't have the patience. I'd stand over a cracked stove, experimenting with whatever cheap ingredients we had. Eggs, rice, onions, sometimes canned tomatoes if we were lucky. No one praised it. At best, my father would shrug and say, "At least it's edible." At worst, he'd laugh and tell my brother, "Cooking isn't a real skill. It's what people do when they can't do anything else." But cooking was the only place where things made sense to me. In the kitchen, effort mattered. If you paid attention, if you cared, ingredients could turn into something better. Still, none of that mattered in my father's house. To him, I was just another mouth at the table. And when money got tight the year I turned 18, I became the easiest one to remove. The weeks before, I was thrown out, felt like living in a house where the air had slowly turned colder. No one said anything directly at first. It showed up in smaller ways. My father would glance at the grocery bags and sigh like they weighed 100 pounds. At dinner, he started counting portions out loud. 3 chicken pieces instead of 4, half a loaf of bread instead of the whole one. My brother noticed it too. One night, he nudged my plate with his fork and smirked. "Better eat fast," he said casually. "Dad says food's getting expensive." My mother never argued. She just kept wiping the same spot on the counter, eyes down, like she hadn't heard. I tried to make myself smaller after that. I skipped breakfast most mornings, sometimes dinner too. When I did cook, I used whatever leftovers I could find, turning scraps into soup, stale bread into something almost decent. No one thanked me. Instead, my father would sit back in his chair, studying me like a problem he hadn't solved yet. Sometimes he'd shake his head slightly, the way people do when they're already tired of something. Looking back, I realized the decision had already been made. I just didn't know yet that they had started practicing what the table would look like without me. The night he told me to leave, something inside me didn't break the way people expect. It went quiet. No shouting, no begging, just a strange stillness, like a door closing somewhere deep in my chest. I remember standing on the sidewalk with my backpack, the porch light buzzing above me. Through the thin curtains, I could see them sitting down to eat. My chair was already pushed in, like it had never belonged to anyone. For a long time, I thought about knocking. Not to argue, just to ask a simple question: where am I supposed to go? But the answer was already clear. Nowhere they cared about. That realization followed me through the next few years. Through the cramped apartments, the overnight shifts washing dishes, the burns on my hands from hot pans and cheap fryers. Kitchens became my shelter, the only place where effort wasn't dismissed. One night, years later, I stayed late after service experimenting with a new dish. The owner tasted it, went quiet for a moment, then looked at me differently. "Where did you learn to cook like that?" he asked. I almost laughed, because the truth was simple. I learned when I had no home left to go back to. I never chased revenge, at least not in the loud, dramatic way people imagine. The first few years were just survival, washing dishes, chopping vegetables, cleaning floors after midnight. I watched every chef carefully, how they moved, how they balanced flavors, how they stayed calm when the kitchen turned chaotic. Eventually, someone trusted me with a pan, then a station, then a menu idea. Cooking rewards patience. Every sauce, every dish, every service teaches you something, if you're willing to stay quiet and pay attention. I built my career the same way, slowly, deliberately, without announcing it to anyone. By 26, I was running my own kitchen. By 28, the restaurant earned its first Michelin star. People assume that moment must feel like fireworks. In reality, it felt quiet. Just another confirmation that years of work had finally lined up. But success changes something else too, the rules. In my restaurant, everything is structured. Reservations logged, service standards written, policies clear. One of those policies sits, printed on the host's stand, and the final page of every menu. A restaurant reserves the right to refuse service. It's a simple line most guests never notice. But the night my parents walked through my doors asking for a free table, I suddenly realized exactly why it existed. From the kitchen pass, I could see them clearly. 10 years had changed them, but not in ways that surprised me. My father still carried himself with that same rigid confidence. Shoulders squared like the room belonged to him. My mother sat beside him, eyes drifting around the dining room, taking in the soft lighting, the polished glasses, the quiet conversations. The host leaned toward me. They said they're your parents. They're asking if the chef can take care of their table. Take care of it. I watched them for a moment longer. My father tapped the menu with 2 fingers, already impatient. The same gesture he used when dinner at home wasn't ready fast enough. For a second, the memory of that porch light flickered in my mind. Then it passed. I picked up a pen and wrote a short note on the back of their bill. No anger, no explanation. Just a few calm words. I handed it to the server. Take this to table 12, I said quietly. A few minutes later, I watched from the kitchen as the folder was placed in front of them. My father opened it first. Inside was the full bill, and a single line written beneath it. We reserve the right to refuse service. For a moment, nothing happened. My father stared at the note as if the words might rearrange themselves into something else. His jaw tightened slowly, the way it used to when he was deciding whether to argue or pretend he wasn't bothered. My mother read it next. Her eyes moved from the paper to the open kitchen window where I stood, behind the pass. She recognized me immediately. I saw it in the way her shoulders stiffened, the small breath she held before looking down again. The server waited politely beside the table. No one raised their voice. No scene, no dramatic confrontation, just a long, uncomfortable silence that spread across their table like a shadow. My father closed the folder, then opened it again, as if hoping the bill might disappear the second time. It didn't. Around them, the dining room carried on, glasses clinking, quiet laughter, plates leaving the kitchen exactly as planned. To everyone else, it was just another night of service. Eventually, my father stood up. They left without touching the menus, and for the first time in my life, I understood something clearly. Being thrown out of that house hadn't made me worthless. It had simply removed me from a place that never knew my value in the first place. After they left, the dining room settled back into its usual rhythm. Orders moved across the pass. Plates left the kitchen in careful lines of color and heat. The quiet focus of service wrapped around me again, steady and familiar. No one asked questions. In restaurants, people learn quickly when to mind their own business. Later that night, after the last table was cleared and the lights dimmed, I stood alone in the kitchen for a moment. The stainless steel counters reflected the soft glow from the hallway, and the air still carried the faint scent of herbs and butter. 10 years earlier, I had stood outside a house where I wasn't welcome. Now I stood inside a place I had built from nothing. The difference wasn't revenge. Not really. It was distance. Distance from the boy who believed being unwanted meant being worthless. Distance from a table where my place had always felt temporary. Tomorrow the restaurant would open again. New guests, new dishes, new chances to create something worth remembering. And somewhere out there, my father would probably tell a different version of tonight's story. That was fine, because the only table I ever needed to earn a seat at was the one I built myself.